The Romanovs. There is a basement in Yekaterinburg. The night of the 17th of July, 1918. A family descends the stairs. The father carries his ailing son in his arms. The daughters have sewn jewels into their corsets. The mother clutches a cushion. They think they are waiting. They think this is a precaution. They think many things that are not true. The basement has brick walls. A single barred window. A bulb that swings. 11 people go in. Not one comes out alive. The family was called Romanov. They had ruled Russia for 305 years. They had built St. Petersburg from nothing, from marshland and the blood of laborers. They had fought Napoleon. They had held off the Turks, the Swedes, the Poles. They had weathered war and famine and cholera and revolt. They had kept together an empire that covered 1/6 of the earth's surface. Then they went down into that basement. Great dynasties have something in common with great cathedrals. You build them for eternity. They always end in ways you never foresaw. The Romanovs had everything: absolute power, marble palaces, the gold reserves of the imperial bank, armies, titles. They had something rarer still. They had a story that read like a novel. And like all great novels, it contained heroes and monsters, saints and madmen, geniuses and incompetents. It contained a woman who drank German wine and rewrote Russia. It contained a man 2 meters tall who bent iron bars with his bare hands. It contained a monk with magnetic eyes who never died quite enough. It contained a child whose blood would not stop. It contained everything. And then it contained that basement. This story has been with me for years. I am carrying it into the book I am writing, a book that gathers these histories of dynasties, of noble blood and blood spilt, of crowns that weigh and thrones that burn. But today I want to tell it here, like this, because it deserves to be heard aloud. Because the Romanovs are the most cinematic dynasty in European history. And European history, in the end, is the history of all of us. But to understand how it ends in that basement, you have to understand how it begins. You have to go back 305 years. You have to go back to a Russia that is burning. 1613 is a year of ash. Russia has just endured 15 years that the history books call the Smuta. The time of troubles. But that phrase is too tidy for what actually happened. Famines. Epidemics. Foreign armies walking into the Kremlin as though they owned it. Tsars who lasted weeks, then vanished. Pretenders to the throne sprouting from every corner of the country, each with a different story and the same hunger for power. Russia is a country that has lost its name. That has lost its shape. And so the great men of the realm gather. Boyars, feudal lords, bishops, representatives of the cities. They are looking for a name. Looking for someone to hold the pieces together. They choose a boy of 16. Mikhail Romanov. Son of Filaret, Patriarch of Moscow. His blood touched, by a sideways line, the old Rurik dynasty. His great-aunt had been Anastasia Romanovna, the first and beloved wife of Ivan the Terrible. The right blood. The wrong age. A fragile temperament, say those who know him. When the delegation arrives to offer him the crown, Mikhail weeps. His mother weeps. She says her son is too young, that Russia is too difficult, that this is a task for a man and he is still a child. The delegation waits. In the end, Mikhail accepts. He is brought to Moscow on a sleigh. It is February. The Russian cold in February is a physical thing, something concrete that enters the bones like a nail. The boy arrives at the Kremlin with frozen cheeks and a crown waiting for him. That crown weighs more than he expected. The first years of his reign are not his. They belong to his father, Patriarch Filaret, who returns from Polish captivity and takes the title of co-Tsar. Mikhail signs the documents. Filaret decides. But it works. Russia knits itself back together. The borders return. The harvests return. The country stops burning. And the name Romanov remains. It remains for 305 years. Through plague and the Great Northern War. Through Pugaczew's rebellion and Napoleon's invasion. Through reforms and reaction, openings and pogroms, glory and paranoia. Every generation adds something. Every generation takes something away. Every generation believes itself to be the final one, the one that has solved the problem of Russia. And every generation discovers that the problem of Russia is not solved. It is inherited. But among all the Romanovs, there are some you cannot skip. Some who changed the entire world, not merely Russia. Men and women who, when they entered a room, changed its shape. The first of these was called Peter. And to understand him, you must picture him like this, 2 meters 13 in height, hands that could not a horseshoe, a technical intelligence that had him working in Dutch shipyards under a false name to learn how a vessel is built. A Tsar who pulled the teeth of courtiers to practice his dentistry. A Tsar who always carried a bag of surgical instruments. A man who took Russia and turned it by force towards Europe. Peter the Great comes to power through blood. His sister Sophia holds the regency. He grows up in the foreign soldiers' quarter, learns German and Dutch, studies mathematics and war. When he takes power into his own hands, he is 24 years old and already knows what he wants. He wants to build a window onto Europe. He builds one literally. He takes a marsh on the Baltic Sea, ground that is ice in winter and water in summer, and builds a city on top of it. St. Petersburg. He builds it with workers who die in their thousands of scurvy and exhaustion. He builds it with Italian and Dutch architecture, with canals and stucco palaces, with avenues that face the west. He builds it because Russia, Peter says, must stop turning its back on the world. He obliges the boyars to shave their beards. Those who wish to keep them pay a beard tax. He introduces the European calendar. He sends the sons of the nobility to study in England and Germany. He builds the Russian navy from nothing. He defeats Sweden and secures access to the Baltic. Peter does not persuade. Peter imposes. And Russia follows, because Russia has learnt that the Tsar is not argued with. You fear him or you love him, often both at once. Peter is feared and loved in the way one fears and loves a river in flood. But there is something Peter cannot resolve. The same problem every Romanov after him will inherit. Russia is vast. Russia is unlike anything else. Russia has something in its soul that resists every attempt at modernization the way permafrost resists a spade. You can build St. Petersburg on the Baltic. But the real Russia is still out there, in the forests at the east, in villages where peasants pray before the same icons as their great-grandparents and have no notion of what Europe is. That tension is never resolved. Not under Peter. Not under Catherine. Not under Alexander. Not under Nicholas. It is the tension that finally tears everything apart. Catherine, too, the one history calls the Great, understands this tension better than anyone. She arrives in Russia as a German princess of 16, marries the future Peter III, an unstable, pro-Prussian man who treats her with contempt. She learns Russian. She embraces orthodoxy. She transforms herself. And when her husband ascends the throne and proves himself both incompetent and dangerous, Catherine organizes a coup in 6 months, deposes him, and leaves him to die in prison a few days later. No official explanation. No trial. Only a communique citing hemorrhoidal colic. Catherine reigns for 34 years. She expands the empire towards the Caspian and the Black Sea. She annexes Crimea. She corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot. She founded libraries and theatres. She bought paintings by the cartload and placed them in the Hermitage, which she herself had built to contain them. She was an 18th century woman who read everything, understood everything, and knew that power is maintained by culture as much as by the sword. She also had lovers. Many. History calls them favourites. They were chosen with care. They were young, intelligent, often capable. One of them, Potemkin, was also a military and political genius. Their relationship lasted decades, changed shape, became friendship and then alliance and then something without a precise name. The Russia that enters the 19th century still bears her fingerprints. But what Catherine does not resolve, what no Romanov manages to resolve, is the question of the serfs. Millions of peasants bound to the land like chattels. Bought and sold with the fields. Without rights, without a voice, without a future. It is upon this foundation of silent humiliation that the rage grows which will eventually destroy everything. And in the meantime, in the palaces of St. Petersburg, history was already preparing its strangest and most unsettling characters. Alexander III has walrus moustaches and the build of a bear. He weighs 18 stone. When the imperial train derailed in 1888 and the roof of the dining carriage began to give way, Alexander held it up with his arms for long enough to get the family out. Nobody knows for certain whether it is true. But Russia believes it. And Russia believes it because it corresponds to something real. Alexander was built that way. Hard as stone. Without elegance, without the refinement of his predecessors. He did not speak French in the drawing rooms. He drank vodka. He wore peasant boots when he could. He was a Tsar who loved the rough Russia, the Russia that Peter the Great had tried to civilize, and perhaps understood it better than Peter ever did. His father had been Alexander II, the great reformer, the Tsar who abolished serfdom in 1861. Who created independent courts? Who was on the point of signing Russia's first genuine constitution? He was assassinated before he could sign it. One bomb, then another. He dies on the cobblestones of St. Petersburg with his legs blown apart, carried to the palace in a uniform that had ceased to be a uniform. Alexander III watches his father die like that. And he closes everything down. Reaction, control, repression. The revolutionaries who had struck his father are hanged. Among them was a young man of 21. His younger brother, Vladimir, committed every detail to memory. His name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. They will call him Lenin. History has a long memory and a sense of irony that spares no one. And then there is Rasputin. One must pause over Rasputin because Rasputin is one of those figures who seem invented. A Siberian peasant. No formal education. Eyes of a clarity that contemporaries describe as hypnotic. He arrives in St. Petersburg from nowhere, from the forests of the East, carrying his reputation as a holy man, a healer, a seer. The imperial family meets him in 1905. The young Alexei, heir to the throne, suffers from hemophilia, an illness without cure at the time. A minor wound, a wobbly tooth, and the blood will not stop. The Tsarevich has grown up between one crisis and the next. Rasputin manages to calm him. How? Nobody knows for certain. Perhaps hypnosis. Perhaps suggestion. Perhaps something medicine at the time had no name for. The mother, the Empress Alexandra, believes in him with her whole heart. Rasputin becomes indispensable. Then he becomes influential. Then he becomes dangerous. The courtiers despise him. The newspapers attack him. The nobility is scandalized. Terrible things are said about his relationship with the Empress. Almost certainly false. But in politics the truth counts for less than perception. On the night of the 16th to the 17th of December, 1916, a group of aristocrats invites him to dinner. They put poison in the food and in the wine. Rasputin does not die. They shoot him. Rasputin does not die. They beat him. Rasputin falls. They throw him into the river never beneath the ice. This time he dies. He drowns, his lungs full of freezing water. The post-mortem reveals he had drunk the poisoned wine. That the poison was enough to kill 5 men. Rasputin was already beyond the ordinary. He already belonged to something larger than political history. He belonged to that dark region where Russia meets mystery and mixes them together until they can no longer be told apart. His death does not save the monarchy. It hastens its end. Because the Empress, without him, collapses. Tsar Nicholas II is already crushed by the war, by strikes, by the revolution rising like water through a basement floor. And Rasputin was the only one holding that family together in his own fashion. Now he is gone, and there are only 4 months left before everything ends. Nicholas II is the last Tsar of Russia. He is also, in a certain sense, the least suited to be so. He was gentle. He was affectionate. He loved his wife and his 5 children with a tenderness that the court diarist recorded every day. He played with his daughters in the park. He photographed everything with a German camera. He was passionate about tennis and cycling. He was, in a word, a private man trapped in a public role that dwarfed him. He was not unintelligent, but he was rigid. He believed in autocratic power as a matter of religion, as a divine mandate he had received and could not surrender. When asked to open up, to share power, to listen to Parliament, he listened and then did what he had already decided to do. In 1905, after Bloody Sunday, when troops fired on a crowd of workers marching to the palace with a petition, Nicholas signed the October Manifesto and granted a Duma. Then he sabotaged it from within, appointment by appointment, decree by decree. In 1914, he entered the war that would destroy 4 empires. The Russian, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the German. 4 imperial crowns knocked from history in 4 years. In 1917, he abdicated. He abdicated on a train, with a pencil, on a sheet of paper. He signed for himself and for his son Alexei, to whom he had already transferred hereditary rights 10 minutes before changing his mind. It was the 15th of March. The war continued. Russia was burning again. The following year, the Romanovs were already in Bolshevik hands. Held prisoner first in Western Siberia, then in Yekaterinburg. They waited. They waited for a trial, an exile, something. Nicholas rose each morning and did his exercises in the courtyard. Alexandra read. The girls embroidered and wrote letters. Alexei, often bedridden, stared at the ceiling. They did not know the decision had already been taken. They did not know that night in July had already been written somewhere in an order coming from Moscow. They go down to the basement. They are told there is danger, that they must wait somewhere safe. Chairs are brought. Alexandra asks for 2, one for herself and one for Alexei. They sit down. The guards enter the room. One of them reads out an order. Nicholas has time to say 1 word. Then darkness. The daughters survive the first volley because the jewels sewn into their corsets deflect the bullets. They are killed with bayonets. Of all of this, history has preserved the photographs, the diaries, the letters. It has preserved the remains, found in a Russian forest in 1979 and officially exhumed in 1991. It has preserved the DNA analysis that in 1994 confirmed the identities using blood from the Duke of Edinburgh, a maternal line relative of the family. It has also preserved the mystery of Anastasia. For decades, the youngest of the Grand Duchesses was at the center of a legend. A woman named Anna Anderson claimed to be her, a survivor. German courts debated the matter for years. The Romanovs in exile divided over it. The world hoped. The DNA closed the story in 2008. The remains of Anastasia and Alexei were in a separate grave, not far from the first. She was there. She too had died. There was no survivor. But a legend does not die with science. Legends live somewhere else, in that same dark region where Rasputin lived, where all the stories live that official history cannot quite contain. The Romanovs had reigned for 305 years. They had brought Russia from the medieval world of the boyars to the warships of the Imperial Navy. They had built the Hermitage and the Trans-Siberian Railway. They had given the world, through the composers they patronized, music that is still played everywhere. They had given it, through the writers they shaped and sometimes persecuted, novels that are still read. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, Turgenev. All of them grew up in the shadow and the light of the Romanov throne. That basement in Yekaterinburg is the end of a story. But it is also the beginning of another. The beginning of 100 years in which the world has tried to understand what really happened, who these people truly were, whether Russia might have gone differently, whether history can go differently at all. I believe that great dynasties never end entirely. They remain in the stones of the palaces. They remain in the names of streets. They remain in something that moves in the blood of those who come after and do not know they carry it. The Romanovs are still there. They are in the Hermitage, in the paintings Catherine bought in such extraordinary quantities. They are in the grammar of Russian power, which learnt under them how to hold together an enormous and impossible country. They are in the icons the family carried with them into that basement. They are in the photograph Nicholas took one summer with his children in the garden, all 5 of them laughing towards the lens, oblivious to everything. This is the true face of a dynasty. Not the official portraits, not the crowns, not the peace treaties. It is that summer photograph, that moment of likeness stolen from history before history takes everything back.